You don't belong at this table, my brother told me as I dropped off $400 in gifts. This house isn't for failures, Dad added. So I cut the power, canceled every bill, and left them freezing on Christmas. I banged on the front door, switching the bulky grocery bag from one hand to the other. Ice cracked beneath my shoes. My jacket smelled like straw and fuel, but that was just normal in my world. The door creaked open, letting a cold breeze out. Mom stood there, lips pressed tightly. Chris, she said slowly, peeking behind her. This might not be the best moment. I frowned. Isn't Christmas dinner about to begin? From inside, I heard Bruce laugh through his nose. Yeah, if you're family, I blinked. Huh? Bruce walked up behind Mom, arms folded over his fancy sweater. Listen, he said, we had a chat, and you just don't really belong in what we've built here. I stared. I don't belong? Mom flinched. It's just, you show up smelling like the farm, dragging mud around, wearing those torn jeans. I run a farm, I replied flatly. Bruce smirked. Exactly. A cold ache formed in my chest. I looked past them. The house looked cozy. Warm light spread over a big table loaded with food. My niece and nephew played near the tree, their faces glowing with joy, and I stood outside in the cold, being told I wasn't wanted. Mom sighed. Please understand, sweetie. We've got visitors, important ones. It's just simpler if I what? I interrupted. Don't make you look bad? Bruce didn't move. You get it, Chris. You're still living out there in the mud with animals. We've moved ahead. We've got images to keep up. I gave a short laugh. That's rich. I own more land than half the people in this county, I said. I make more in a month than you do in 12, Bruce. But go ahead. Keep pretending you're above me. His grin faded, but Mom jumped in. It's not about cash, darling, she said softly. It's just Bruce and his people. They care about appearances. And well, you're a bit messy. I snorted through my nose. Right, got it. I shifted the bag in my hands. Then without saying anything else, I placed it down on the porch. Inside were pricey, carefully chosen gifts. I had picked every single one for them. Then I turned away and walked back to my truck. I sat behind the wheel, engine humming low. I held my phone to my ear. Yes, I said calmly. Please disconnect the electricity and water at 154 Oid Road. Account is under Chris Smith. The lady on the other end paused. Are you sure, sir? It's going to be freezing this week. I let out a breath, watching the fog in front of my face. Yes, I'm certain, she typed fast. Okay, it's done. The shut-off will happen. I ended the call before she finished. They didn't want me around? Fine. Let's see how they survive without my help. I stayed parked, watching the house in my mirror. My breath made the glass cloudy. The Christmas light still blinked on the porch, but I knew what was going on inside. Mom would be fiddling with the heat. Dad would be cussing under his breath. Bruce was probably yelling for someone to call me. My phone buzzed. Mom showed on screen. I didn't answer. Then Dad, then Mom again. I finally picked up and hit speaker. Chris, the power just cut off. Mom sounded panicked. I waited a second, letting her freak out a bit. Yeah, I said. That's what happens when no one pays. What? You remember, Mom? I said calmly. The paper you made me sign years ago? The one putting all the bills under my name so you wouldn't have to deal with them? You told me it was easier, since I had a real job and Bruce was still figuring things out. You know, the same Bruce you just chose over me? Chris, this isn't funny, she shouted. Your father and I need that power. I leaned back, holding on to the steering wheel. Maybe you should have remembered that before saying I wasn't wanted for Christmas. Dad's rough tone broke in. Son, this is immature. Just handle the payment and quit being dramatic. I let out a laugh and shook my head. Funny how that's always your answer, huh? Every time Bruce messes something up, it's me who has to step in, pay his bills, fix the damage, deal with the problems, and what do I get in return? This house isn't for failures, right at the entrance. Mom paused. Sweetie, it's not like that. Isn't it? I replied quickly. I shut my eyes and everything came flooding back. Bruce was always their favorite, the athlete, the funny one, the center of attention. I had to earn everything. When I got accepted to A&M on a scholarship, Dad barely reacted. When I worked and bought my first truck at 18, Mom laughed and said Bruce would own a better one someday. No matter how hard I pushed myself, no matter what I achieved, they never saw me differently. I was always just the second choice, the backup. Still, when Bruce dropped out of college, got into debt, and couldn't keep a job, guess who they reached out to? When the mortgage went unpaid, when his kids needed supplies for school, when he and Rebecca had no money for Christmas, it was always JN has it covered. JN earns well. Chris will handle it. And I did. Because part of me hoped that if I helped enough, gave enough, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally value me the way they did him. But tonight, That was the final straw. You know what, Dad? I let out a breath. You're right. I'm done pretending. No more helping. No more saving Bruce. Chris, don't do this, Mom begged. I already have, I said, turning the key. And if I were you, I'd grab a few blankets. It's dropping to 15 degrees tonight. Then I hung up. They didn't want me around? Fine. Let's see how they handle things without my support. That evening, they all ended up sleeping in the living room, huddled by the fire. Their breath was visible in the icy air. The fancy Christmas meal they'd planned fell apart. Guests left early, putting on coats, shaking their heads at the chaos. The table, nicely decorated with all the expensive dishes Mom had worked so hard on, sat untouched. Nobody wanted to eat in a freezing house. Bruce's kids were sent next door, bundled up and whining, not understanding why they couldn't stay home. Even Rebecca didn't say a word, just stood there watching her husband stomp back and forth near the fireplace. Mom sat quietly, a heavy blanket over her shoulders, staring at the fading glow of the fire. Her face looked worn out. Dad sat nearby, sipping a drink. His jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might crack. This is insane, Bruce finally yelled, running his fingers through his hair. He wants to be dramatic? Fine. But dragging everyone into this? Who does he think he is? That's enough, Bruce, Mom said softly, rubbing her forehead. We'll speak to him in the morning. He wouldn't leave us like this. He just wants someone to notice. Dad grunted. That boy's always been bitter. Always trying to prove something. Bruce laughed bitterly. Well, I guess he proved it. Merry Christmas. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. Mom, then Dad, then Mom again. I didn't answer right away. I sipped my coffee slowly, enjoying the warmth of my house. I looked out at my land. The cattle didn't care about any of this. The ranch kept going, same as always. A little later, a message popped up from Bruce. You feel good now? You ruined Christmas. Hope it was worth it. I laughed and shook my head. Yeah, it was. Then my phone rang again. This time I picked up. Chris, Mom's voice was tired and hoarse. Do you realize what you've done? We froze all night. The kids had to sleep at the neighbors. Everyone went home early. You destroyed Christmas. I stayed quiet for a little while, then gently took another sip of my warm drink. I didn't break anything, I finally replied. I just stopped funding it. Then Dad spoke again, voice firm and ice cold. That's enough. You made your point. Now turn the power back on. I grinned slightly. Not happening. Mom breathed in shakily. Chris, please. This isn't fair. You can't do this to people who raised you. A sharp laugh escaped my mouth. Family? I repeated. That's funny. Coming from the ones who left me outside on Christmas Eve. I guess it's only family when it benefits you, huh? You're being ridiculous, Mom tried to say. Really? I replied. Because to me, it just feels like I finally gave you what you've always given me. That's not how it is, Dad growled. I leaned backward in my seat, legs stretched out. Let's walk through it slowly then, I said calmly. You needed someone to manage the household costs. I did it. The heater broke. I paid for it. Bruce's kids needed gifts every year. I handled that too. And what did I get in return? What did all that effort earn me? I paused for a second. Absolutely nothing, I said softly. Not a single thank you. Just being turned away like I didn't matter. I could hear Mom quietly crying. Then Bruce's voice jumped in, filled with anger. You think this is hilarious? He snapped. You humiliated all of us in front of everyone. You had to make a show out of it, didn't you? I didn't even show up, I reminded him. You were the ones making a scene. I just stopped rescuing you from it. You're nuts, he spat. What kind of sibling acts like this? The kind who's tired of being walked all over, I replied, taking another calm drink of coffee. Bruce cursed under his breath. Mom tried not to cry louder. Dad mumbled something about how I was selfish and difficult. I grinned quietly. Merry Christmas, everyone, I said, then ended the call. I dropped the phone onto the table and leaned back again, slowly letting out a breath. The silence around me was calm. No shouting, no guilt, no pressure. Just me, my coffee, and the warm air from a working heating system. It was the total opposite of whatever disaster was still going on at their house. Bruce's earlier message came to mind. Feeling good now? You messed up Christmas. Hope it was worth it. Was I feeling good? Not really, but I wasn't feeling bad either. For the first time in ages, I felt like I could finally breathe. I stood up, pulled on my boots, and stepped outdoors. The air was cold, the kind that stings your cheeks but feels clean when you breathe it in. The ranch stretched out in front of me, lightly dusted in frost. The cattle stood by the feeders, their warm breath floating into the sky. They didn't care about drama. Neither did the icy ground or the brightening sky as the sun began to rise. I walked toward the barn, my hands in my coat pockets, thinking about how different my morning looked compared to theirs. Mom was likely still sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in every blanket in the house. Dad was probably walking around angrily, ranting about how I betrayed them. And Bruce? Oh, he was definitely still furious, probably calling every person he could to paint me as the bad guy for cutting the power. Maybe I should have felt bad, but I didn't. Instead, it felt like I had finally done what I should have done years ago. They spent so long making me feel like I owed them everything that I had to keep giving, keep fixing, keep putting myself last. And for what? For this? For a group that tossed me aside the second I wasn't useful anymore? I shook my head and stepped into the barn. Some of the ranch workers were already inside, feeding the animals and breaking up the ice in the water troughs. One of them, an older man named Antonio, looked up and nodded. "Family mess?" he asked with a grin while checking the feed levels. I laughed a little. "Something like that," Antonio chuckled. "Yeah, I've been through that. Haven't called my folks in over a decade. Best thing I ever did." I didn't say anything. I just grabbed a bucket of feed and started helping him. The early part of the day went by quickly as I focused on work around the ranch. By the time I stepped back inside the house, I had nearly forgotten about checking my phone. Almost. When I finally looked, there were a bunch of missed calls and a few voice recordings. I skipped past them, but one message stopped me. It was from Rebecca, Bruce's wife. "Rebecca, hey, I just wanted to say I get it. I didn't agree with how it all went down. I told Bruce he crossed the line. You've done more for us than he'll ever give you credit for. I thought you should know that." I stared at her message for a long time before setting the phone aside. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone was completely hopeless. That night, I sat outside on the porch, holding a cold drink, staring up at the stars. Everything was still and calm. Then I saw headlights approaching in the distance, bouncing along the dirt path toward my place. I already had a strong feeling about who it was. Sure enough, Dad's truck came to a stop, and the door opened right away. Dad stepped out first, arms folded, looking furious. Bruce came next, his face just as angry. Mom didn't get out. She sat in the passenger seat, watching silently through the glass. They didn't wait for me to speak. "You finished acting like a child?" Dad barked, stomping up to the steps. I leaned on the railing, staying cool. "Nice seeing you too." "Turn the power back on," Bruce demanded. "It's freezing. Mom's tired." Everyone left. The kids had to stay at the neighbors. "You've made your point." I raised my eyebrow. "You mean the point you made, Bruce? When you decided I didn't belong at Christmas because I wasn't good enough? That point?" Bruce's teeth clenched. "You didn't have to go this far." Dad stepped forward, nostrils flaring. "Enough. This ends now. You're going to fix this and do what's right. You're part of this family. You owe us that." I slowly stood up, placing my beer on the railing. "I owe you?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. Dad hesitated, but then stood his ground. "Yes. After all we've done for you." I laughed once, sharp. "All you've done for me?" Bruce folded his arms. "Yeah, Chris, we raised you. We gave you food, clothes, and a place to stay. And this is what we get?" I let out a long breath and shook my head. "Wow, you really believe that, don't you?" He frowned. "You honestly think feeding your kid and giving him shelter is some huge gift?" I said, my voice dropping. "That's your job as a parent, Bruce. That's the least you're supposed to do." They went quiet. "You want to talk about who owes who?" I continued, stepping closer. "Let's go over what I did. Who paid your bills when you couldn't afford them? Who made sure your kids had presents and clothes? Who handled Mom and Dad's house when no one else wanted to deal with it?" Bruce looked away. "You took everything I gave you," I said, my voice now icy. "And the one time I say no, you make me out to be the villain." Dad took a sharp breath. "Chris, you're turning this into something bigger than it really is." I shook my head. I'm finally calling it what it is." At that moment, Mom stepped out of the truck. Her voice was soft and her face looked exhausted. "Sweetheart, please, we don't want things to stay like this." I turned to face her. For the first time, my voice trembled a little. "You don't want this?" I asked. "You think I did?" I paused. "But you all made it clear how you see me, and I finally believe it." She looked like she might start crying. Dad let out a sigh. "So that's it? You're just cutting us off? Leaving us to freeze?" I stared straight into his eyes. "I finally figured out the truth," I said. "You only care about me when I'm doing something for you." I stopped moving, gave my head a small shake, and said, "That kind of affection? I don't need it anymore." Bruce swore quietly. Dad blew out a breath, frustrated. Mom softly whispered, "Chris." I walked by them, heading straight for the front steps. Just before I entered, I turned around. "Merry Christmas," I said. Then I pulled the door shut behind me. For the first time ever, I honestly didn't care if they ever called again. I didn't bother looking at my phone the next day. I already knew what would be waiting. Mom crying, Dad furious, Bruce blaming me to anyone who'd listen. Same drama, just a different day. But by the time afternoon came around and I stepped out onto the porch, I saw something I hadn't expected. Bruce's truck. It sat parked at the edge of my property. Bruce was pacing in the cold, fists clenched, his breath visible in sharp bursts like he was trying to talk himself into something. I sighed, pulled on my coat, and headed over. Lost something? I asked. Bruce spun around, eyes wide. You think this is funny? I crossed my arms. Depends. Which part are you talking about? He stepped in closer, his body tight with anger. You destroyed everything. That nearly made me laugh. Oh, really? And here I thought I just stopped covering your bills. Bruce's jaw locked. You seriously don't understand. Rebecca left with the kids. She's staying with her folks now. She told me she's tired of the constant stress. She wants space. She thinks I'm a failure. All because of you. I raised one eyebrow. Is that because of me? Or because she finally noticed what I've been noticing my entire life? His cheeks flushed red. I've lost everything. And I gave up years, I snapped. Years spent bailing out someone who never even said thank you. So no, I don't feel bad for you. Bruce's chest was rising and falling, like he was ready to swing at me. I tilted my head slightly. Go ahead, I said. Throw a punch. Let's see if it solves your mess. For a second, I really thought he would. His hands were clenched so tightly they looked pale. But he didn't hit me, because deep down, he knew I was right. He dropped his shoulders. Just flip the power back on, he muttered. Make this right. No. He looked up quickly. No? You heard me, I replied. I'm finished cleaning up after you. His face twisted with frustration. We're related, I laughed once. Funny how that only matters when you're the one who needs something. He opened his mouth like he had something to say, but nothing came out. For the first time in his life, Bruce had no response. He stood there, his fury turning into something else. Fear, because now he understood I wasn't playing. You don't mean this, he said, shaking his head. You can't be serious. I mean every word of I said. And I absolutely can. A gust of wind hit us, cutting through our coats. Bruce turned away, scuffing the ground with his boot. Dad's furious, he muttered. Mom hasn't stopped crying. I let out a breath through my nose. Not my issue anymore. He looked back up fast. Yes, it is. You're the reason they're miserable, I scoffed. Wrong, Bruce. That's on you. You and Dad with your pride, Mom with her excuses. You all know how to blame, but not once did any of you ever stop and ask why I was the one holding everything together. Bruce dragged his palm down his face, clearly fed up. Fine, he muttered. You want to hear it? You were the one who acted responsibly, the one who earned a living, the one who actually had money. That's why it was your job to help. I narrowed my eyes. No, Bruce, that's why it was easier for you all to dump it on me. That doesn't make it right. Silence followed. The weight of what I said finally reached him. His breathing slowed. His arms loosened. He knew I was telling the truth. Then he let out a dry, bitter laugh. You know, Dad always said you held a grudge, said you were jealous of me. I let out a quiet huff. Jealous? Of what? The favors? The constant mess-ups? The way Mom and Dad acted like you were perfect, no matter how badly you failed? Bruce stiffened. I moved my head side to side. Nope, I've never been jealous of you, Bruce. He stared. His jaw got tight. You're serious? Absolutely, I replied. For a few seconds, he stood still, looking at me like he didn't recognize who I was anymore. Like he was trying to remember the version of me who always gave in, who always said sorry first, who always got blamed so no one else had to. But that person didn't exist anymore. Eventually, he sighed and stepped back. So that's how it is? He muttered. You really want to turn your back on all of us? I already have, I said. Bruce looked like he was about to keep arguing, but instead he turned around, walked to his truck, and climbed inside. The wheels spun, throwing dust as he drove away. I didn't bother watching him leave. I went back toward the porch, stepped up, and closed the door behind me. For once in my life, I wasn't the one being abandoned. I was the one choosing to let go. Follow-up. That went downhill fast. Honestly, I didn't expect this post to explode like it did. I've been reading all your replies and, wow, people feel strongly about what happened. Some of you think I overreacted. Others believe I did what had to be done. A few of you seem to think I'm some kind of monster. Let me respond to the top comments I've seen. You left your family without heat. Who does that? Let's clear things up. I did cut the power, yes, but the fireplace was still working, and they had more than enough blanket. No one was in any danger. If I wanted to be cruel, I could have done it during a snowstorm or while they were dealing with something serious, but I didn't. I picked a time when they had choices. And remember, they're the ones who told me I wasn't wanted on Christmas. They shut me out. So why should they still expect help from my wallet? You could have just had a talk instead of pulling this stunt. Oh, my dear summer flower. Do you really believe I never tried that? For years, I attempted to set limits. I explained over and over that I wasn't some kind of cash machine. I told them I couldn't keep paying for everything. And what happened every single time? They guilt-tripped me. They manipulated me. They promised they'd change, but never did. So what finally got their attention? Not when I was stressed or broke, only when they had to feel even a slice of what I went through. Then suddenly it was a crisis. You should have just cut them off completely instead of doing this dramatic thing. Look, I get it. That's a valid opinion. But the truth is, I didn't want to walk away forever. I just wanted them to finally understand. And you know what? It worked. What happened next? A lot of you asked for an update. So here's what happened after I posted. 3 days later, I flipped the power back on. I never planned on keeping it off permanently. I just needed them to feel what life was like without me covering the basics. And when I turned it back on, nobody ended up homeless. Nobody went bankrupt. You know what did happen? They adjusted. Turns out, they actually had money. They just didn't want to spend it on bills. They were using my income to pay for comforts, while I paid for heat and electricity. When they realized I wasn't going to save them anymore, they started being responsible. They still lived in a nice house. They still ate good meals. Only difference? I wasn't funding it. And here's the twist. About 4 weeks later, my parents said sorry. Mom called. She said they hadn't appreciated me. She admitted they let Bruce influence them too much. She told me they were wrong. And honestly, that meant everything. For the first time in forever, I felt like they saw me as a real person, not a money source. But did it stick? Here's the part where you all make guesses. After a few quiet months, the little hints started again. The calls, the subtle guilt. Oh, Chris, we're a bit tight this month. Could you cover the water just once? At first I said nothing. Then I reminded them how things went last time they treated me like a credit card. They backed off. For now. So what do you all think? Will they fall back into old habits, or did they finally learn? Your move, Reddit.